I found my wife's secret affair with our business partner. She's manipulated him into signing over $250, $0 of our joint property, and now he's suing us for fraud after discovering the betrayal. Hello everyone. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Now, let's begin the video. Using a throwaway for obvious reasons, with certain specifics modified to preserve anonymity. I never thought I'd find myself in a situation like this, honestly. My wife Emily always seemed like the perfect partner, smart, beautiful, ambitious. We had a good life together, or so I thought. We owned a small but thriving business and everything was supposedly on track. But then out of nowhere, things started to feel off. Little things at first. She'd be distracted during conversations, cancel plans suddenly, or get defensive whenever I asked about her day. Small red flags, I told myself, nothing major. Then came the signs that hit me like a punch to the gut. I noticed her phone was always on silent and she'd hide it when I was near. I found her deleting messages late at night and I caught her in little lies about where she was or who she was with. I brushed it off, thinking maybe she was stressed or just busy, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. One night, I decided to do a little digging. I had access to the shared business accounts, and I noticed some strange transactions that didn't add up. A deposit of over $250, $0 for example, from an account I didn't recognize. It was labeled as a loan repayment, but I knew we didn't take any loans recently. Then I remembered she had been acting weird around the business partner, Jake. She'd been spending more time with him, late nights at the office, secretive phone calls, even sneaking out of the house when she thought I wasn't looking. I'd caught her in a lie about going to a conference, only to find her dining with Jake at a fancy restaurant downtown. That's when it clicked. The pieces all fell into place. I started to piece together the timeline, how she manipulated Jake into signing over a chunk of our property, how she'd kept him in the dark about her real intentions. She told him they were just working on a project, but I knew better. The way she looked at him, the way she touched him when she thought I wasn't watching, she was having an affair. And not just that, she was using him to drain our assets, manipulate him into signing papers that gave her control over our property. I felt sick. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was financial too. How could she do this to me, to us? I remember feeling this intense mix of anger and heartbreak. All those nights I stayed up worrying about the future, and it was all a lie. She'd been cheating, lying, and scheming behind my back. I wanted to scream, to shout, to make her see how much she'd hurt me. But I knew I had to keep calm. I needed to gather evidence, plan my next move. That night I sat alone in the dark, going through everything I'd uncovered. I felt a deep sense of betrayal, but also a strange clarity. I realized I couldn't trust her anymore, not as my wife, not as the person I thought I knew. The next day, I started to think about how to confront her properly, how to protect what was left of our life together. But I knew this was just the beginning. The real storm was coming. I'll tell you this, nothing prepares you for the shock of discovering your wife is cheating on you, especially when she's also manipulating your assets into her own pocket. It's a whole new level of betrayal. It's not just about the sex, though that's part of it. It's about trust, respect, and the life we built together crumbling in an instant. And I'm sitting here trying to figure out what to do next. The moment I realized everything was unraveling, I felt like I was hit by a freight train. I spent the night going over every detail, every suspicious transaction, every lie she told me. I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing, trying to come up with a plan, trying to process how Emily, the woman I loved and trusted, could do this to me. I kept asking myself what I did wrong, but deep down I knew it wasn't about me. It was her. She was the one who lied, manipulated, and betrayed. The next morning, I knew I had to confront her. I wasn't going to let her get away with this, especially not after what I'd uncovered. I prepared myself. I gathered all the evidence I could find, screenshots of the bank transactions, copies of the documents she had tricked Jake into signing, even a few messages she sent to him that proved she was actively seducing him into her scheme. I wanted her to see I knew everything. I wanted her to feel the weight of her lies. When I got home that afternoon, she was in the kitchen, pretending to be busy with something. I could see her trying to act normal, but I wasn't fooled. I took a deep breath and just laid it out there. Emily, I know what you've been doing. I know about the affair, about the property manipulation, about the money. Her face froze for a moment, then she smiled that fake, bitchy smile, like she thought she could lie her way out of this. What are you talking about? You're crazy. You're just jealous or paranoid. I'd never do something like that. I didn't buy it. I showed her the evidence. Her face drained of color as she looked at the screenshots, the transaction records, the messages. She tried to deny everything. It was useless. I saw her eyes flicker with guilt and annoyance. She started spinning her usual lies, how she was just helping Jake with some business deal, how we were overreacting, how she loved me, but this was all a big misunderstanding. I knew better. I'd seen enough to know she'd been manipulating Jake into signing over our property, into trusting her, into doing whatever she wanted. And she was still lying, still trying to cover her tracks. I felt a surge of anger. How could she do this? How could she betray me like this for some cheap thrill and a quick buck? I told her I wasn't going to let her destroy everything we built, that this wasn't just about the money, it was about respect and loyalty. I told her I was going to take legal action to protect what was left of our assets. Her reaction? She threw a tantrum, screaming, crying, calling me paranoid, saying I was overreacting, that I was just jealous. But I wasn't listening anymore. I'd made up my mind. That confrontation was the turning point. I realized I couldn't trust her, not even a little bit. Every word she said felt like a lie. Every excuse she made was just more manipulation. I felt like I was waking up from a nightmare I didn't know I was in. It was like the woman I loved had been replaced by a stranger, someone capable of cold deception and betrayal on a scale I never imagined. The emotional fallout hit me hard. I felt a mix of rage, heartbreak, and confusion. I was furious at her for what she'd done, but also devastated because I still loved her, or at least I thought I did. How do you love someone who's been lying to your face? How do you rebuild trust after something like this? For days, I cycled between anger and sadness, trying to figure out what my next step should be. One thing was clear. I was done pretending everything was okay. I couldn't stay silent anymore. I needed to protect myself, my business, and whatever was left of my dignity. I knew I had to get legal advice to start the process of undoing whatever damage she'd done. But part of me still wondered if she'd come back, if there was any hope for us. Honestly, I was too hurt to think straight. All I knew was that my world had been turned upside down, and I had to face the reality that the woman I trusted had been secretly working against me all along. The days that followed were a blur of meetings, legal consultations, and a sinking feeling that I'd been blind for so long. I couldn't believe how deep her lies ran. Emily always had a way of acting like she was the innocent victim, playing the part of the betrayed wife, even as she was the one orchestrating this entire scheme. I kept replaying all the moments, all the signs I'd missed, her dismissive attitude when I asked about her late nights, the subtle way she avoided my eyes when I pressed her for answers. It was like I was living in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I decided to start documenting everything, saving emails, taking screenshots of bank statements, copying documents, even recording her when she wasn't looking. I didn't trust her anymore. I knew she was capable of spinning more lies just to get out of trouble. Everything pointed to her trying to manipulate Jake into signing over our property, and I was determined to prove it. I wanted to show the authorities and the courts the full scope of her betrayal. I also began to realize how much money she had already drained from us. That $250, $0 transfer. It wasn't an isolated incident. She'd been siphoning funds slowly, probably over the past several months. She'd been funneling money into accounts I didn't know about, and I couldn't help but feel sick every time I looked at the numbers. It was like she was stealing my life savings, my future, right from under my nose. She'd always been good at lying, but now I was seeing through all of it. She was a master manipulator, and I was just starting to understand the extent of her deception. The more I uncovered, the angrier I got. I realized she'd been using her charm and bitchy attitude to keep me off balance, to make me doubt myself. She'd lie and lie until I was questioning my own sanity. And all the while, she was plotting her next move, probably trying to convince Jake to go along with her scheme or to cover her tracks. I felt like I was fighting in the dark, trying to find the light, but I also knew I couldn't let her get away with it. Not this time. I started to think about how I could turn this around. I knew I had to be strategic. I wasn't just going to file for divorce or separation. No, I wanted to fight for everything she was trying to steal. I was already drafting legal documents, talking to lawyers who specialized in fraud and property disputes. I also reached out to a private investigator to see if I could get more evidence of her dealings with Jake, anything that would prove she was actively manipulating him, coercing him into signing over our assets. I needed to build a case, and I needed it airtight. Meanwhile, Emily was still acting bitchy, throwing tantrums whenever I brought up the topic of her lies or her betrayal. She'd deny everything, call me paranoid, accuse me of trying to control her. But I saw through her. She was panicked now, trying to cover her tracks, but I'd already seen too much. I knew her tricks. She'd lie, then lie some more to cover her lies. It was a game I was learning to play too, one I didn't want to lose. I was starting to see her for what she really was, a manipulative, selfish woman who'd do anything for money and control. It hurt to admit that, but I couldn't ignore the facts. I'd always wanted a fairy tale ending, but now I was faced with a brutal reality. Emily had betrayed me at the worst possible level, and I had to decide whether I was going to fight to save what was left of my life or just accept that I'd been played for a fool. The most shocking part, she had no remorse. Not really. Just more lies, more deflections. She kept insisting she loved me, that it was all a misunderstanding, that I was overreacting. But I knew better. I knew she'd been lying to my face for months, maybe longer. And what made it worse? The fact that she'd manipulated Jake into signing over our property, thinking she could get away with it. I couldn't let her get away with it. Not without a fight. By now, I was fully immersed in gathering evidence and planning my next moves. Every day felt like a chess game, and Emily was the opponent, always trying to bluff, to spin her lies, to manipulate the situation in her favor, but I wasn't going to let her win. I knew her game, and I was determined to outplay her. The more I dug, the more I realized how deep her deception went. She wasn't just cheating on me. She was scheming to take everything we had built, money, property, even my trust. One day, I got a call from the lawyer I'd hired. They told me they'd found discrepancies in the documents Emily had presented to Jake, signatures that looked suspicious, dates that didn't add up. Turns out she'd been forging some signatures and trying to cover her tracks with fake paperwork. That was the final straw. I asked the lawyer to start proceedings immediately, freeze any transfers, review all documents, and prepare for a legal battle. I knew I had to act fast before she could do any more damage. Meanwhile, Emily's attitude was getting worse. She was bitchy, confrontational, and dismissive, trying to gaslight me into thinking I was overreacting. She'd call me paranoid or accuse me of not trusting her, but I knew better. I had seen the evidence, and I wasn't going to back down. I could see her panic creeping in, her false veneer cracking. That fake bitchy smile she always wore was now tinged with desperation. I could tell she was starting to realize she might actually lose everything, her schemes, her lies, her control. The financial damage was piling up. When I looked at the bank statements, I saw more transactions, small amounts siphoned here, larger sums transferred there. She'd been slowly draining our joint property, turning it into her own personal piggy bank. I was furious. How could she think she could manipulate her way out of this? How could she be so cold? It was like she didn't care about me, about the life we'd shared. All she cared about was her own greed. I decided I needed to confront her again, face to face, and lay everything out in the open. I wanted her to understand I wasn't going to be played anymore. I told her I had evidence of her forgery, her manipulations, her lies. Her reaction, she snapped. Started yelling, calling me crazy, accusing me of trying to ruin her. But I didn't care. I'd already made up my mind. I told her she was done messing with me, that I was filing for divorce and full legal action to recover what she'd stolen. Her bitchy attitude only got worse, but I didn't back down. I was done being her fool. That night I sat alone in my study, staring at the evidence spread out before me. I felt a strange mixture of relief and heartbreak. Relief because I finally understood what she was capable of, and heartbreak because I'd loved her once. I'd believed in us. But now I saw her for what she really was, a manipulative, selfish woman who'd betrayed everything we ever stood for. I realized I needed to cut her out of my life completely for my own sanity and future. I also knew I had to prepare for the legal fight ahead. I reached out to the best attorney I could find, someone experienced in fraud and property disputes. I wanted to make sure she didn't get away with this. I'd fight for every dollar, every piece of property she tried to steal. I was angry, yes, but I was also determined. I'd learned a hard lesson. Trust has to be earned, and some people, like Emily, are willing to destroy everything just for their own greed. I wasn't going to let her do that too. Me, not anymore. The legal process moved faster than I expected, but it also felt like it dragged on forever. Emily, of course, kept up her bitchy attitude, throwing tantrums whenever I pressed her about her lies or her schemes. She'd pretend to be the innocent victim, crying crocodile tears, claiming I was trying to ruin her. Honestly, I'd never seen someone so good at pretending to be the wronged wife while secretly scheming behind the scenes. She'd even accuse me of controlling her, of not trusting her, like she was the victim here. It was unbelievable how she twisted everything around. Meanwhile, I was gathering more evidence. I hired a private investigator to dig deeper into her dealings with Jake. Turns out, she'd been pushing him to sign over more than just the property. She'd been convincing him to invest in fake deals, promising him a big payoff, all under the table. She manipulated him into believing she was on his side, but all along she was just using him to get what she wanted. That was the moment I knew I had to act fast. If she kept this up, she could wipe us out completely. The court documents I filed revealed everything: the forged signatures, the suspicious transactions, the coercion. I had a judge order her to stop all transfers and freeze any assets involved. It was a small victory, but it felt like a huge weight off my shoulders. I knew the fight wasn't over, but at least I was starting to take back control. I also started preparing to sue her for fraud and breach of trust. I wanted her to pay for what she'd done, not just financially but emotionally too. I was sick of her lies, her manipulations, her bitchy attitude that she used to try to intimidate me. Emily's reaction, she went ballistic. She screamed at me, called me a paranoid psycho, told me I was ruining her life. But I didn't care anymore. I was numb to her tantrums. I saw her for what she was, a manipulative bitch who'd do anything for money and control. That realization made me more determined than ever to see this through. I knew I had to protect myself, my assets, and my sanity. I couldn't let her get away with destroying everything I'd worked for. The worst part, I still loved her. Somewhere deep down, I guess I still wanted her to see reason to admit she'd screwed up. But she doubled down, trying to gaslight me into thinking I was overreacting. That was the final nail in the coffin. I realized I had to accept that she was no longer the woman I married. She was a liar, a manipulator, a thief. And I was the one left standing, trying to pick up the pieces. Looking back now, I see how blind I was. I ignored all the warning signs, dismissed the little red flags because I wanted to believe in us. I wanted the fairy tale. But fairy tales don't come with betrayal, manipulation, and greed. They come with honesty, trust, and respect. Emily tore all that apart. Still, I'm grateful I caught her early enough to stop the damage from getting worse. I may have lost a lot, but I'm starting to rebuild, stronger, wiser, and more cautious about who I trust. Now, sitting here reflecting on everything, I realize that this whole nightmare has changed me. I used to believe in fairness, honesty, and that love could conquer all. Turns out, some people are just out for themselves, willing to lie, cheat, and manipulate everything and everyone around them just to get what they want. Emily was one of those people. I thought I knew her, but I was dead wrong. The woman I loved turned out to be someone I barely recognized, selfish, bitchy, and completely ruthless when it came to her own greed. Losing the trust I had in her was like losing a part of myself. But I also learned something important. You can't ignore the signs, no matter how much you want things to be different. I should have seen it coming, but I was blinded by love and hope. Now I know better. I learned the hard way that trust isn't given freely, it's earned, and it can be shattered in an instant. The aftermath has been a mix of relief and heartbreak. I managed to stop her from draining everything, and I've begun the process of rebuilding my life. I've cut her out completely. No contact, no regrets. I've come to terms with the fact that she was never the person I thought she was. I've also realized I need to focus on myself, my business, and my future. I won't let her betrayal define me, but I will use this experience as a lesson to be more cautious, more guarded. If there's one thing I want anyone reading this to take from my story, it's this: trust is fragile. Watch for the signs, listen to your instincts, and never ignore red flags. People can pretend to be something they're not, especially those closest to you. And sometimes, the hardest thing you'll ever do is walk away from someone you loved, knowing they've betrayed everything you believed in. But in the end, protecting yourself and your future is more important than holding on to illusions. I've learned that revenge isn't about petty payback. It's about standing up for yourself and making sure the truth comes out. Emily thought she could manipulate her way out of this mess, but she underestimated me. I fought for what was rightfully mine, and I won't let her get away with it. Now, I'm focusing on healing, rebuilding, and making sure I never get caught off guard like this again. It's a hard lesson, but one I won't forget. And honestly, I'm glad it's over.